In the mission of San Miguel, 20 leagues north of Lima, they kept the bell tower locked because Brother Benjamin could reach the ropes without climbing. He stood taller than the doorways, 7 feet and 7 inches of Andean bone and silence, baptized at 16 and sworn to obedience by 18. The priests called him gentle, the soldiers called him useful. The other novices called him nothing, because fear has no language. For 3 years, Benjamin swept the stone floors, carried water barrels that took 2 men to lift, and knelt during Mass with his head bowed so low his forehead touched the pew. He never spoke unless spoken to. He never looked a Spaniard in the eye. He had learned, as all the mission-born learned, that stillness was survival. But on the morning of August 12, 1681, they found Brother Tomas face down in the chapel courtyard, with his skull cracked open and his rosary missing. The soldiers said it was a fall. The other novices knew better. Tomas had tried to stop a conquistador from dragging a girl, no older than 12, into the storeroom. He had shouted. He had reached for the man's arm. They found him an hour later. That night, Benjamin did not sleep. He sat in the chapel alone, his massive hands folded in prayer, his eyes fixed on the crucifix above the altar. The candles burned low. The stone walls held the smell of incense and old blood. Outside, the soldiers laughed in the courtyard, passing a wineskin between them. By dawn, the mission bell did not ring for lauds. The tower door hung open. Inside, 9 men lay broken on the stone floor, their necks bent at angles God never intended. The ropes still swayed. Brother Benjamin was gone. Chapter 1. The Weight of Silence. They found the girl first, curled in the corner of the storeroom, her dress torn, her eyes fixed on something no one else could see. She would not speak. She would not eat. By afternoon, the priest had moved her to the infirmary and scrubbed the floor with lie and prayer. Brother Tomas was buried without ceremony in the plot behind the mission wall, where they kept the unbaptized and the unnamed. Father Rodrigo said the words quickly, his voice flat. The soldiers stood in a loose circle, hands on their sword hilts, eyes scanning the hills beyond the compound. No one mentioned the blood on the courtyard stones. No one asked how Tomas had fallen. Benjamin knelt at the grave after they left, his shadow stretching across the fresh-turned earth like a second burial shroud. His hands, large enough to palm a man's skull, rested on his thighs perfectly still. He did not pray aloud, he did not weep, but something in him cracked. That evening, Captain Vargas gathered his men in the refectory, 9 conquistadors, most of them veterans of the Highland campaigns, men who had learned to sleep with their boots on and their daggers close. Vargas was thick-necked and practical, with a scar across his jaw that he claimed came from an Inca spear. He drank from a clay cup and watched the novices serve the meal, boiled maize, salt pork, bread hard enough to break teeth. "Keep them working," Vargas said to Father Rodrigo. "Idle hands invite the devil." Father Rodrigo nodded. He was a small man, bent from years of bowing, his fingers stained with ink and candle wax. "Brother Benjamin will help with the harvest. He is strong, obedient." Vargas glanced toward the kitchen where Benjamin stood scrubbing an iron pot, his back to the room. "That one? He looks like he could pull down a wall." "He would not," Father Rodrigo said quietly. "He is sworn to peace." Vargas grunted. "Peace is a luxury. Watch him anyway." That night Benjamin did not return to the novices' quarters. He climbed the narrow staircase to the bell tower, a place forbidden to all but the priests, and stood among the ropes and shadows. The tower windows faced the hills where his people had lived before the missions came, before the baptisms and the labor levies and the Spanish names that replaced the names their mothers had given them. He could see the courtyard below, the soldiers' barracks, the chapel door, the storeroom. He stayed there until the stars shifted and the first rooster crowed. Then he descended, silent as smoke, and resumed his place among the kneeling and the obedient. But his hands, when he folded them in prayer, no longer trembled. Chapter 2. The Vow That Bent. The mission operated on a rhythm older than memory. Dawn prayers, labor, midday mass, more labor, evening prayers, sleep. Benjamin moved through it like a shadow, lifting stones for the new granary wall, hauling sacks of maize from the fields, carrying water from the river in barrels that would have broken a mule's back. The other novices watched him with a mixture of awe and caution. He never complained. He never rested. When the overseers shouted, he obeyed before the command finished. When the soldiers mocked him, calling him El Gigante Mudo, the mute giant, he bowed his head and kept working. But something had changed. Brother Mateo noticed it first. He was older than Benjamin by a decade, a former field laborer who had taken vows to escape the mines. He found Benjamin in the chapel one night, kneeling before the altar with his eyes open, unblinking. "You have not slept," Mateo whispered. Benjamin did not turn. Sleep is for those with clean hands. Mateo knelt beside him. The candles guttered in the draft from the open door. Outside, the soldiers were playing dice, their laughter harsh and sudden. "Tomas knew the risk," Mateo said carefully. "We all do. He died trying to stop them, and now he is with God." Benjamin's jaw tightened. God did not stop them either. The words hung in the darkness like blasphemy. Mateo crossed himself and stood. "Do not speak like that, they will hear you." "They hear nothing," Benjamin said. "They see nothing. They believe we are animals who pray." Mateo left without another word. The next morning, Benjamin requested permission to work in the bell tower. Father Rodrigo hesitated. Novices were not typically trusted with such access, but Benjamin was needed. The ropes had frayed, and the bells required maintenance that only someone of his height could perform without scaffolding. "Do not touch the bells themselves," Father Rodrigo warned. "Only inspect the ropes and mechanisms. Report any damage." Benjamin bowed. "Yes, Father." For 3 days he worked alone in the tower. The soldiers below assumed he was praying or maintaining the equipment. The other novices assumed he was being punished. Father Rodrigo assumed he was too simple to cause trouble. No one watched him measure the dimensions of the tower. No one saw him test the weight of the iron bell brackets. No one noticed when he began leaving the tower door unlocked at night. On the 4th day, Captain Vargas sent 2 soldiers to check on him. They climbed the narrow staircase and found Benjamin kneeling in prayer, his head bowed, his hands folded. "What are you doing up here?" one soldier demanded. "Praying for Brother Tomas," Benjamin said softly. The soldier spat on the floor. "Pray quieter. We can hear you whimpering from the courtyard." They left laughing. Benjamin remained kneeling until their footsteps faded. Then he stood and looked down at the courtyard below. The storeroom door was visible. The soldiers' barracks, the refectory where they drank and mocked and forgot that God was supposed to be watching. He counted them. 9 men. He would need them to come alone. Or in pairs. Never all at once. And he would need them to believe, until the very last moment, that he was still the obedient giant who bowed and scraped and never met their eyes. He descended the tower at sunset and resumed his work, carrying stones for the granary wall with the same patient silence as before. But now, his silence had purpose. Chapter 3. The First Thread. The mission kept a ledger, a thick book bound in leather, kept in Father Rodrigo's office, that recorded every soul brought to baptism, every death, every bushel of maize tithed to the church. Benjamin had seen it once, years ago, when he first arrived. His name was there, written in careful script, Benjamín de los Andes, bautizado 1678, estatura excepcional, exceptional height. As if that were all he was, Brother Tomas's name had been added on the day of his burial, with a note in the margin, Muerte accidental, accidental death. Benjamin knew where Father Rodrigo kept the key to the office. A small iron key hung on a nail beside the chapel door, disguised among a dozen others used for storage sheds and cellar gates. He had cleaned that hallway 100 times. He had memorized every nail, every shadow, every creak in the floorboards. On the night of August 17th, he waited until Compline finished and the priests retired to their quarters. Then he slipped into the hallway, lifted the key from its nail, and unlocked the office door. The ledger sat on the desk, closed. Beside it, a sheaf of letters waiting to be sent to Lima, reports to the Archbishop, requests for supplies, complaints about the natives' stubbornness. Benjamin could read Spanish well enough. The priests had taught him, believing literacy would tame him. They were wrong. He opened the ledger and turned the pages slowly, carefully, until he found the entries from the past month. There, Tomas's name, and below it a notation in Father Rodrigo's cramped handwriting. Inquiry unnecessary. Captain Vargas confirms no foul play. Incident closed. Benjamin's hands tightened on the page. The paper wrinkled under his fingers. He turned more pages, other names, other notations, disappeared, fever, disobedience, corrected. Each one a life reduced to ink and abbreviation, filed away and forgotten. He closed the ledger and returned it to the desk. He locked the office door. He hung the key back on its nail. But before he left, he took one of the letters, a supply request addressed to a merchant in Lima, and carried it to the kitchen. There, by candlelight, he read it twice. Then he held it over the flame until it caught fire and turned to ash in the clay basin used for washing vegetables. No one would notice. Letters went missing all the time, but Benjamin had learned something important. Father Rodrigo wrote to Lima every fortnight. Captain Vargas filed reports monthly. The mission operated on schedules and records, and the assumption that no one was watching them. Benjamin was watching. The next morning, he resumed his work in the bell tower. The soldiers had stopped checking on him. Father Rodrigo had stopped worrying. The other novices had stopped asking questions, but Brother Mateo came to him at midday, carrying a water skin and a crust of bread. He climbed the tower stairs and found Benjamin inspecting the bell mechanisms, his massive hands moving with surprising delicacy. "You have been up here for days," Mateo said. "The work is not finished." "What work? The ropes are fine." Benjamin did not answer. Mateo set the water skin down and lowered his voice. "What are you doing, Benjamin?" "Praying." "For what?" Benjamin turned and looked at him directly for the first time in weeks. His eyes were dark and calm and utterly without fear. "Justice," he said. Mateo left the tower and did not return. That night, Benjamin stood at the tower window and watched the soldiers gather in the courtyard. They were drinking again, passing a wineskin, telling stories about the Highland campaigns, villages burned, roads paved with bodies, women taken as spoils. Captain Vargas was there, laughing louder than the rest. Benjamin counted them again. 9 men. He would begin with the ones who patrolled alone. If you're still watching, tell us in the comments where in the world you're watching from, and how this story found you. Chapter 4. The Silent Preparation. The mission's routine made men predictable. Benjamin had learned this through 3 years of sweeping floors and carrying water. Soldiers followed patterns like prayers, repeated until habit became instinct. 2 men guarded the gate at dawn. 1 man checked the storerooms at midday. Captain Vargas inspected the barracks every evening before supper. And after supper, when the wine had loosened their discipline, they wandered. 1 man always walked the perimeter alone. A private named Ortega, young and nervous, assigned the midnight watch because he owed gambling debts to the others. He carried a sword he barely knew how to use and walked the same circuit every night. Granary, chapel, stables, back to the barracks. Benjamin watched him from the bell tower window for 3 nights, timing each circuit. 11 minutes. Never more than 12. On the 4th night, Benjamin descended from the tower after Compline and positioned himself near the well. The courtyard was dark except for a single torch burning near the chapel entrance. The other soldiers were inside the barracks, drinking and gambling. Father Rodrigo was in his office, writing letters by candlelight. Ortega appeared at 11:47, walking with his hand on his sword hilt, his eyes scanning the shadows. He was 19, maybe 20. He looked tired. Benjamin stepped into the torchlight. Ortega startled, his hand tightening on the sword. "What are you doing out here?" "Fetching water," Benjamin said softly. gesturing toward the well. His voice was submissive, apologetic. Father Rodrigo needs it for morning mass. Ortega relaxed slightly. At this hour, he forgets to ask until late. Ortega grunted and started to turn away. Then he paused. You're the tall one, the giant. Yes. You speak Spanish well for a native. The priest taught me. Ortega studied him for a moment, then smirked. You're lucky. Most of your kind end up in the mines. At least here you get fed. Benjamin nodded, eyes downcast. I'm grateful. Good. Stay grateful. And get your water quickly. It's not safe to wander at night. Benjamin bowed and turned toward the well. Ortega continued his patrol, walking past the granary toward the stables. Benjamin did not fetch water. He waited until Ortega was out of sight, then followed at a distance, moving with a silence that seemed impossible for someone his size. The stables were dark, the horses drowsy. Ortega paused to check the latch on the gate, his back to the courtyard. Benjamin approached from behind. No weapon, no rope, just his hands. It was over in seconds. One hand across Ortega's mouth, the other around his neck. A single terrible twist. The sound of bone breaking was quieter than expected, a muffled crack, like green wood snapping. Benjamin lowered the body to the ground and dragged it into the stable. He covered it with hay and horse blankets. The horses stirred but did not panic. Animals, Benjamin had learned, recognized the difference between violence and slaughter. He returned to the well, drew water, and carried the bucket to Father Rodrigo's office as if nothing had happened. The next morning, Ortega was reported missing. Captain Vargas organized a search party, assuming the young soldier had deserted or gotten drunk and wandered into the hills. They found no blood, no signs of struggle, just an empty patrol route and an unlocked stable gate. He probably ran, one soldier muttered. He owed money to half the garrison. Vargas ordered the remaining men to double their vigilance. He increased patrols. He locked the storerooms. He posted a guard at the bell tower. Benjamin continued his work, quiet and obedient. He hauled stones for the granary wall. He swept the chapel floors. He knelt during mass with his head bowed. But that night he returned to the bell tower, now with a guard posted below, and opened the window. The wind carried the smell of smoke from the soldiers' fires. He could hear them arguing about Ortega, speculating about desertion, threatening punishment if anyone else tried to flee. Benjamin looked down at the courtyard. 8 men now. He would need to move faster. Chapter 5. The bells begin to fall. 3 nights later, 2 soldiers, Delgado and Ruiz, were sent to inspect the mission's outer wall, which had suffered damage during the last rainstorm. It was routine work, performed at dawn when the light was still gray and uncertain. They carried tools, a hammer, nails, a coil of rope for makeshift scaffolding. Benjamin volunteered to assist them. Father Rodrigo approved without hesitation. The giant was strong, useful, and most importantly silent. He would not distract the soldiers with questions or complaints. The outer wall stood at the far edge of the compound, beyond the view of the barracks and chapel. The section needing repair abutted a steep hillside dense with scrub brush and loose stone. It was isolated. Quiet. Perfect. Benjamin worked without speaking, hauling stones while Delgado and Ruiz examined the damaged mortar. They barely acknowledged him, treating him like a pack animal, useful but unworthy of conversation. Hand me the hammer, Delgado ordered. Benjamin obeyed. More stones. Benjamin obeyed. Hold this rope steady. Benjamin obeyed. The sun climbed higher. The soldiers grew careless, their attention divided between the work and their complaints about Ortega's disappearance, about the increased patrols, about how the priest worked them like slaves while they themselves lived in comfort. Delgado turned his back to adjust the scaffolding rope. Benjamin stepped closer, his shadow falling across the man's shoulders like a shroud. One strike. Delgado's skull met the stone wall with a wet, final sound. Ruiz spun around, eyes wide, hand reaching for his sword. But Benjamin was faster. A kick to the knee, bone shattering, then hands around the throat, lifting Ruiz off the ground as easily as lifting a water barrel. The soldier thrashed, clawing at Benjamin's arms, but those arms were hewn from mountain stone and 3 years of silent endurance. When it was over, Benjamin arranged both bodies at the base of the wall, positioning them to suggest an accident. The scaffolding collapsed, the stones fell, 2 men crushed beneath the weight of their own careless work. He returned to the mission carrying the tools. He reported to Father Rodrigo that the wall was repaired but that the soldiers had gone to inspect another section. "They told me to return," Benjamin said. "They will finish the work themselves." Father Rodrigo nodded absently, already distracted by his correspondence. The bodies were discovered that afternoon. Captain Vargas stood over them, his face darkening. "The rope was cut," he said, pointing to the frayed scaffolding line. "It was old," Father Rodrigo suggested. "Perhaps it snapped under the weight." "It was cut," Vargas repeated. He turned to the remaining 6 soldiers. "Someone is killing my men. Lock down the mission. No one works alone. No one leaves the compound. And search every inch of this place." They searched the stables, the granary, the chapel, the priest's quarters. They questioned the novices, threatened them, searched their belongings. They found nothing. Benjamin knelt in the chapel during the search, praying aloud in Quechua, a language the soldiers did not understand. They ignored him, assuming he was too simple, too obedient, too broken to be dangerous. That night Vargas gathered his remaining men in the barracks. 6 soldiers, including himself. They barricaded the door and posted 2 guards outside. They slept with their swords drawn. Benjamin did not sleep. He climbed to the bell tower, now unguarded, the soldier who had been posted there reassigned to protect Vargas, and stared down at the barracks. The 2 guards stood at the entrance, nervous, their eyes scanning the darkness. He could not reach them all at once. Not yet. But he was patient. The mission operated on schedules and routines. Eventually, they would have to open the door. Eventually, they would have to eat, to drink, to relieve themselves. Eventually, they would make a mistake. And Benjamin would be waiting. Chapter 6. The Tower's Reckoning. On the morning of August 21st, Father Rodrigo rang the bell for lauds, or tried to. The rope would not pull. He tugged again, harder, and the rope went slack in his hands, severed at the top. "Brother Benjamin," he called. Benjamin appeared from the shadows of the chapel, moving with his usual silent deference. "The bell rope is broken. Climb up and repair it." Benjamin bowed. "Yes, Father." He climbed the narrow staircase to the bell tower. Captain Vargas, watching from the barracks doorway, called out to Father Rodrigo, "Keep him in sight. I don't trust anyone right now." "He is harmless," Father Rodrigo replied, but he stationed himself at the base of the tower stairs nonetheless. Benjamin worked slowly, deliberately, examining the bell mechanisms, the brackets, the stone walls. From the tower window he could see the entire compound, the barracks, the courtyard, the chapel entrance. Below, the 2 guards stood at the barracks door, exhausted from a sleepless night. Captain Vargas emerged from the barracks, calling for water and bread to be brought to his men. A novice, Brother Mateo, hurried to obey, carrying a clay jug and a basket of hard rolls. Benjamin watched Mateo approach the barracks, watched the guards accept the food, watched Vargas bark an order, sending one guard to check the gate while the other remained at his post. One guard, alone. Benjamin descended from the tower. Father Rodrigo looked up. "Is it repaired?" "Almost," Benjamin said. "I need tools from the workshop." "Be quick." Benjamin crossed the courtyard, moving toward the workshop, but as he passed the barracks he turned sharply and stepped behind the remaining guard. No warning, no hesitation. One arm across the throat, one hand twisting the neck. The guard slumped without a sound. Benjamin dragged the body into the shadows beside the barracks and took the man's sword. Inside, Vargas and 4 soldiers sat at a rough wooden table, eating in tense silence. The door stood slightly ajar to allow ventilation. Benjamin approached without sound and kicked it open. The soldiers scrambled for their weapons, but Benjamin was already inside. The first man, barely on his feet, took the sword through the ribs. The second lunged with a dagger and met Benjamin's fist, which shattered his jaw and sent him reeling into the wall. Vargas drew his sword and charged. Benjamin dropped his own blade and caught Vargas by the wrist, twisting until bone cracked and the sword clattered to the floor. Then he lifted the captain, a grown man in full armor, and threw him against the stone wall with such force that the impact echoed across the compound. The remaining 2 soldiers tried to flee. Benjamin blocked the doorway, his massive frame filling the exit. One soldier swung wildly with a mace. Benjamin caught the weapon mid-swing, ripped it from the man's hands and brought it down on his skull. The other soldier dropped his sword and begged in broken Spanish. Benjamin did not speak. He did not hesitate. He struck once, cleanly, and the begging stopped. When it was over, 9 men lay dead. Ortega in the stables, Delgado and Ruiz at the outer wall, 1 guard behind the barracks and 5 soldiers inside. The barracks floor was slick with blood. The walls bore handprints where men had tried to brace themselves. The air smelled of iron and fear. Benjamin stood in the doorway, covered in blood, the mace still in his hand. Father Rodrigo appeared in the courtyard, drawn by the sounds of violence. He stopped when he saw Benjamin, his face draining of color. "What have you done?" the priest whispered. Benjamin looked at him with eyes that held no remorse, no triumph, only the cold, exhausted certainty of a man who had done what needed doing. "Justice," Benjamin said. He dropped the mace, walked past Father Rodrigo, and climbed the bell tower stairs. At the top, he pulled the repaired rope. The bell rang, a single clear note that echoed across the hills and valleys, reaching the villages where his people still lived, still remembered the names the Spanish had tried to erase. It rang for Brother Tomas, for the girl in the storeroom, for every soul buried in unmarked graves behind the mission wall. It rang until Father Rodrigo cut the rope from below. By the time soldiers arrived from Lima 3 days later, Benjamin was gone. They found the bodies. They found the bell tower empty. They found footprints leading into the hills, but the trail vanished among the stones and scrub where no horse could follow. The mission was closed. Father Rodrigo was recalled to Lima and died 2 years later, his letters describing the massacre vague and contradictory. The Archbishop declared the incident an attack by hostile natives, punishment for the mission's leniency. No one mentioned Benjamin's name. No one recorded his height or his strength, or the fact that he had killed 9 armed men with his bare hands and a single mace. But in the villages, they whispered, they sang, they remembered. And when the conquistadors rode through the highlands searching for rebels and runaways, they looked over their shoulders at the bell towers and wondered if the giant was watching. If this story kept you holding your breath, hit like. It helps us bring more forgotten histories back to life.